a real apocalypse in Donetsk. Once a flourishing city, it has now turned into a real dump. Bags of feces are lying everywhere. Something unknown is coming out of the tap, and how all this will end is still unclear. Hello, my name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Now I'll tell you how life is in temporarily occupied Donetsk, why people are dying en masse there, and what the occupation authorities are saying. So while you're liking this stream, subscribing to our channel, and leaving your comments, I'll tell you everything in detail. Donetsk was once called the city of a million roses. It was a source of pride for every local resident. Along the roads, near factories, and even in the courtyards, hundreds of thousands of red, pink, and white rose bushes bloomed. Despite its heavy industry, the city had a reputation for being clean, tidy, and well kept. When someone mentioned Donetsk, people immediately thought of football and immediately thought of flowers. Now that's just a memory. The city that once took pride in its green streets is now suffocating from dust, stench, and a lack of the most basic thing, water. A country that once built industrial giants can no longer provide its people with even a glass of that same clean water. Today, Donetsk is literally dying of thirst. The taps are empty. When water does appear, its color is gray or even rusty. The smell of this water is literally unbearable. People stand in line at water trucks for 4 or 5 hours just to get at least some murky, technical water. The water is not suitable for drinking, but there is no other option. Residents of Donetsk live in such conditions that they are forced to do absurd things. In the city, bags of feces are being thrown out of the windows of apartment buildings. Just look at this image. And this is reality. This is no longer a joke. This is reality. Donetsk, which was once called the City of Roses, has now become a city of stench and survival. In the occupied part of Donetsk region, water stopped being just a convenience a long time ago. It has become a real treasure that people are forced to fight for every day. According to official data, at least 109 people in Donetsk have already died due to lack of water, unsanitary conditions, and diseases that spread along with them. Moreover, the water itself is dangerous. Russian propagandist, the so-called war correspondent Dmitry Stashin, almost lost his eyesight. The underlying cause was the water in occupied Donetsk. Amoebas were found in his Rogivka district, which gradually eat away at a person's eyes. This disease is called acanthamoebic keratitis. He could have contracted the infection in Donetsk. Stashin washed his face with water that he had specifically left in a warm place to heat up, and because of this, bacteria could have multiplied there. And in the end, what happened. Why did Donetsk end up without water? The root of the problem is the destruction of the Siverskyi Donets canal, which for decades supplied almost the entire Donetsk region with water. It was specifically Russian troops in 2022 and 2023 who shelled the pumping stations, dams, and the entire infrastructure of the canal. When this canal stopped operating, Donetsk was essentially left without its main source of water. The occupation authorities of the so-called DPR and their Russian overseers occasionally promised to replace hundreds of kilometers of old pipes. But such promises have been made more than once and have brought no results whatsoever. Back in 2013 to 2014, Moscow promised to restore the canal, and Russian companies received billion-dollar contracts to reconstruct the Donbas water supply system. However, the work never began. The money disappeared, and so did the documentation. There was no real progress. And only in August 2025 did the leader of the so-called DNR, Pushilin, officially admit that the water supply was in a catastrophic state. 11 years after the funds were allocated, this admission comes far too late. People have already been surviving for months without proper water, forced to use technical and murky liquid from barrels and quarries, while the entire management system is essentially broken.
That's how we live. We have to fetch it. What else can we do?
What can we do? Asked the residents of Donetsk, and not only them. Some people collect water from puddles, from mine drains, or from old quarries, like here, for example.
We live by scooping water from a puddle. Luba. Can you believe it? My neighbor. The grandmother is 83 years old. How can you live, huh? How can you live without water, huh? How can you live?
How can you live without water? That's the question residents who unfortunately remain in the occupied territories keep asking each other. Well, and these questions perhaps should be addressed to the occupation authorities, because all of this is the result not only of the war started by Russia, but also of years of corruption, negligence, and promises that were never fulfilled. And as a result, the water crisis in the occupied territory of Donetsk region could lead to the resignation of that very Pushilin, who has headed the occupation administration since 2018. And in 2022, he was approved by Russia as the head of the so-called DPR. Talks about his removal have been circulating for a long time, but now they have intensified. An imitation of reconstruction, when the situation became truly critical, Moscow decided to make a demonstrative gesture. An official from the Russian Ministry of Construction arrived in Donetsk. Together with Pushilin, they held a working meeting on restoring infrastructure and stabilizing the water supply. On Russian television, everything looked grandiose: maps, charts, promises, and inspired statements about caring for people. But everyone who lives there knows it's just an imitation. In reality, it's not about reconstruction, but about another round of dividing up the money. Moscow is trying to show that it is supposedly helping Donbas, although in reality it is simply shifting its control over the territory. The occupation authorities have once again promised to replace more than 570 kilometers of water supply networks. But these promises are nothing new. Not once have they been fulfilled. The wear and tear of pipes in Donetsk has reached 100%. In some areas, the water simply leaks into the ground. To avoid responsibility, Russia shifts the burden of restoration onto its donor regions, provinces that are now forced to finance the occupied territories. In fact, the Kremlin is patching up the holes caused by its own war with other people's money. To show at least some results and create the illusion of caring for the occupied territories, the Kremlin has heavily promoted the large-scale Donbas water pipeline project. On paper, it was supposed to be a lifeline for the entire region, a backup canal that would ensure a stable water supply. The plan looked ambitious: 4 separate pipeline lines that were meant to cover almost the entire region. But, as is often the case with Russian mega projects, it all ended up being nothing more than a show. In reality, only one line was built, and even that with numerous violations and accidents, as well as pressure losses in the system. Even at its best, this water pipeline provides less than 30% of Donbas's needs. The rest of the area is left with dry taps, lines of water trucks, and canisters in stairwells.
Water was successfully delivered to the care home located in the village of Lidivka, which, as a result, made the local residents feel extremely happy and grateful. Yes. Drinking water, clean.
It was absolutely delivered for free to my address.
So, well, every day there are more and more people getting involved in helping to overcome this water blockade. Entrepreneurs and just
Grandpas and grandmas, many in the village, can't even go out to fill up a bottle of water.
and dedicated volunteers come with large water tanks, arriving on sturdy gazelle trucks equipped with powerful pumps.
That's the first time I'm hearing this from you. Also, the cost of construction was measured in billions of rubles, but there are no results. The money disappeared among contractors, supervisors, companies, and officials. The so-called Lifeline water pipeline became yet another corruption scandal where water remained only in official reports, not in people's taps. On the map of Donbas, there are now dozens of cities drying up where the word water sounds like a dream. In Kartsisk, there has been no water for the third month. The Olkivska reservoir, the city's main water source, is critically drying up. In Donetsk region, out of the 10 largest reservoirs, 9 have almost dried up over 3.5 years of war. The Starokrimsk reservoir has nearly dried out with only 15% of its water remaining. Now the authorities are trying to pump water from the Makiivka quarry to the Krinka and Kanjankivske reservoirs. But locals are asking a simple question. Why didn't the rivers dry up before, and why were the quarries full of water? Without restoring the supply from the Siverskyi Donets, Donetsk is doomed. Sometimes it seems like the situation is improving a little. The Kanjankivske reservoir, which almost dried up in the summer, has started to fill up again. Perhaps it's because of heavy rains, or maybe due to water being diverted from the Makiivka quarry. Locals say that both factors had an effect at the same time, but this is only a temporary relief. There is still not enough water, and people are being accused of allegedly draining water from the heating systems, which causes the pressure in the system to drop. The quarry itself, once a favorite spot for recreation, has now turned into an almost dried up pit. The water there is murky, reeks of rust, and you can even see buses on the bottom that were previously submerged. Despite this, people go there with bottles and canisters, trying to collect at least a little moisture from the dirty bottom because there simply is no other source. In Makiivka, people stand in line for water for several hours because it is delivered only once every 4 days, 1 barrel for the entire district. The lines stretch for several streets. People argue and even take turns at night.
This is what the central city district of Makiivka looks like. People are collecting water. The water goes everywhere, just not where it's needed. This is how people collect water. It's just unbelievable. The water is running down the asphalt.
You can see for yourself, they're literally scooping water from puddles. So let's continue talking. Today, Mariupol is a city where water is brought all the way from St. Petersburg. It sounds absurd, but that's the reality. There are more than 1,500 kilometers between these cities. And instead of restoring the local water supply, the Russian authorities decided to transport water across half the country. This fact has become a symbol of the utter absurdity and helplessness of the occupation authorities and their system. A city that just a few years ago stood on the shore of the Sea of Azov is now suffocating from thirst. There are almost no functioning toilets or car washes in Mariupol. They are simply closed due to the lack of water. Many cafes, schools, and kindergartens are not operating because they don't even have the conditions for basic hygiene. The sewage system is at a standstill, it stinks in the streets, and people are getting used to the idea that cleanliness is now a luxury. Water is turned on only once every 3 days, and even then just for a few hours. During this short time, people have to do everything: fill up tanks, wash themselves, do laundry, and cook food. People stand by the taps making the most of every minute because the water can disappear at any moment. The pressure in the system drops so quickly that sometimes water simply doesn't reach the upper floors, and residents have to carry it up in buckets from below. To make matters even worse, the Kalchik and Kalmius rivers around Mariupol are visibly drying up. But for now, local residents still bathe there. If the occupation authorities connect the Pavlopil and Starokrimske reservoirs, the Kalmius River could disappear completely, turning into a dry riverbed. This threatens an even greater catastrophe, since these rivers were one of the natural reservoirs for local needs. These few hours of water have turned into a real celebration for the people of Mariupol. But even this luxury is not available to everyone. In remote areas, water is not supplied at all, and people are forced to make do with what is left. Mariupol residents risk their health by using murky and technical water, which is often unsuitable for cooking or hygiene. And even when water does appear, it is absolutely unsafe to use.
Mariupol. Hot water. Coca-Cola is nervously smoking. I'm in shock. We pay for this water. Well, here's the water. How can you even bathe in this?
You can see for yourself what kind of water comes out of the taps. It stinks, leaves residue, and ruins the plumbing. People complain that after washing, they get itching and rashes. It's not used for cooking. Boiling it doesn't help. And despite this, the occupation authorities raised water tariffs starting July 25th. People are paying more for the poison that flows from their taps.
Dennis Pushilin. We live in the DNR. Here's your favorite water, as they call it, that comes out of our tap. When you come, will you try it? I haven't paid and I won't pay for water. Come and cut it off. Go ahead.
It's horrible. Moreover, the so-called occupation authorities of the DNR are cutting off water to abandoned homes under the pretext of fighting illegal connections to the system. Since the beginning of August, 170 subscribers have been disconnected from the water supply, including 48 for unauthorized connections and 122 supposedly abandoned houses that have no owners. Censorship and the fear of local residents are recording everything on video. For example, you can see one of them on your screens right now. They posted on social media begging for help. Children are recording appeals to Putin. Locals don't know how to describe everything that's happening so that it doesn't sound less frightening than it really is. To prevent the truth about the real scale of the disasters from leaking out, the occupation authorities quickly delete these videos and intimidate people. Any post about the lack of water, lines for water trucks, or deaths caused by unsanitary conditions can now become grounds for a criminal case. Local authors are accused of discrediting the authorities or even of extremism. People who are simply trying to tell the truth risk facing real prison sentences. The authorities have effectively imposed an information blockade. Only talk about the successes of restoration and the work of public utilities is allowed. Everything else is forbidden. And when water disappears from the taps, official channels only report temporary inconveniences and technical work. In this way, silence has become part of the system. Not only water, but also the truth is now in short supply. People are left alone with the problem, and even talking about thirst can become dangerous. It's impossible to hide the lines at the water trucks, the trash on the streets, and the foul-smelling water from the taps. Everyone can see it. This is no longer just a household problem, it's an environmental disaster in the heart of a major industrial region. If the situation doesn't change, the number of deaths will multiply by winter. An offensive for the sake of water, that's what's happening. Now it's officially known that 109 people have died due to the water crisis. That's exactly why the Russian army is rushing its offensive in Donetsk region. Because of the water, the enemy army is rushing to capture the Siverskyi Donets, because if they don't, Donetsk won't survive the winter and will turn into a desert. This is no longer just a war for territory. It's a struggle for the physical survival of the occupied cities, because ordinary life has become nothing but a memory. The water catastrophe in Donbas is not just a consequence of the war. It grew out of years of corruption and indifference when officials embezzled budgets under the guise of reconstruction, while cities were left without water. Infrastructure was falling apart, pumps weren't working, but on paper everything looked stable. Donetsk was once called the city of roses in Ukraine, clean, green, and full of fountains. Today it is a city of thirst and fear. People search for water in puddles and reservoirs. The roses remain only in old photographs. While Moscow showcases so-called reconstruction, Donbas is slowly dying. And if nothing changes, those roses will never return. But as international law states, everything that happens in the occupied territories is the responsibility of the occupiers. That is, the terrorist state of Russia, which has brought the occupied territories to an ecological and humanitarian catastrophe, forcing people to drink water collected from puddles, to receive rusty and foul-smelling water from their taps, and to pay unspeakably high sums for it. There's a lot to think about here, a lot to analyze, and of course I look forward to your thoughts in the comments below this video. In the meantime, please subscribe, give a like, and I'll see you in the next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Please take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye-bye, everyone. A winter that could force Kyiv to evacuate. The most apocalyptic forecast for Ukraine. Hello everyone, my name is Anastasiia Husarieva, and while you subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share this broadcast with your friends, I'll tell you what to expect from this winter and what to prepare for. Even the president of Ukraine has already confirmed that this winter will be difficult. So let's get started. 3 days of cold and Kyiv will be deserted. Ukrainians have never heard a warning like this before. An energy expert warns that if the enemy destroys even one of the capital's thermal power plants, the city will face evacuation. There is gas, but there might not be heat. Without the thermal power plants, radiators will burst, pipes will freeze, and buildings will become uninhabitable. This isn't a disaster movie, but a completely real scenario that people are preparing for right now. Will Ukraine be able to get through this winter without mass outages and blackouts? And when might the moment come when the authorities actually say we have to leave Kyiv? Let's figure out why this is a real possibility. Ukraine has enough gas to get through the 2025 to 2026 heating season. There are no resource problems, but even having gas does not guarantee that Kyiv residents will have heat in their homes. Because the main threat this winter is not a lack of fuel, but the condition of the heating infrastructure, which determines the supply of heat. Kyiv is mainly supplied by 2 large combined heat and power plants, CHP-5 and CHP-6. CHP-5 was commissioned in 1971 and CHP-6 in 1981. The equipment has been operating for over 40 years, and about 80% of the capital's heating networks are completely worn out. This means that any serious damage or shutdown of the plants during a cold snap will immediately affect residential buildings, schools, hospitals, and businesses. How does the capital's heating and energy system work? Kyiv's energy system is a complex network where electricity and heat are interconnected. A large part of the power plants are state-owned and include nuclear, hydroelectric, thermal power plants, and combined heat and power plants, CHPPs. The central operator is Ukrenergo, which coordinates the production and delivery of electricity by distribution companies throughout the country. Until 2022, the total capacity of all thermal power plants and combined heat and power plants was about 34 gigawatts, of which 27.7 gigawatts was accounted for by thermal power plants and only 6.5 gigawatts by combined heat and power plants. The main electricity was produced by nuclear power plants and thermal power plants, while combined heat and power plants simultaneously generate electricity and heat, making them key for heating large cities. The share of combined heat and power plants in the overall energy balance is about 10%, but they operate steadily and consistently, ensuring uninterrupted heat supply to hospitals and schools and residential buildings. In Kyiv, the main facilities are CHP5 and CHP6, which provide 48% of the city's heat supply and nearly 60% of its electricity. Their equipment has been in operation for over 40 years without major modernization, and a large part of the networks is worn out. Previously, the complex belonged to the private company Kyivenergo, which invested almost nothing in repairs. Since 2018, the CHPs and networks have been transferred to the municipal enterprise Kyivteplenergo under the management of the city. In order to make Kyiv's heating system more reliable and resilient to shelling and frost, the authorities are attracting international financial and technological support. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is investing in the modernization of the energy sector, helping to upgrade CHP equipment, install new boilers, and improve the efficiency of heating networks. The IFC, International Finance Corporation, is funding the renewal of CHPs and the modernization of local cogeneration units, which allows for rapid heat supply in case of emergencies or peak loads. USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. Thank you. It supports the implementation of new technologies, the creation of backup heat supply schemes, and the training of personnel for rapid response to emergencies. And the SCADA system allows for centralized control of the CHP plants and heating networks, monitoring temperature, pressure, and consumption in real time, and automatically switching systems to backup schemes to avoid mass outages and breakdowns. Thanks to these investments and technologies we're talking about, the capital gains the ability to respond to critical situations much faster and, even in the event of damage to main stations, to provide heat to residential buildings, schools, and hospitals. In addition to large CHP plants, local cogeneration units or mini CHPs are also being developed. These can quickly respond to changes in load and operate on various types of fuel, providing local heat and electricity. This reduces dependence on large stations and increases the flexibility of the system. In large cities, several CHP plants operate to ensure reliable heat supply to different districts. It is precisely the condition of these systems that determines whether Kyiv residents will be able to survive the cold in their homes. Let's talk about that very disastrous scenario. Just imagine Kyiv in the midst of a cold snap below -10 degrees. The CHP plant shuts down due to shelling or a technical malfunction. The water in the pipes instantly freezes, radiators burst, and restoring the system becomes practically impossible without large-scale repairs. In the first hours, residents feel the cold in their apartments, and schools and hospitals are also left without heat. Businesses shut down, and within 3 days, the city can turn into a real ghost town. An energy experiment? Alexander Karchenko warns that if the CHP plant fails and the temperature stays below -10 degrees for 3 days, the authorities must be prepared to evacuate people from the capital. Every minute is critically important because any delay in restoring heat supply threatens the destruction of residential buildings and poses real risks to people's lives, as the expert points out. That is, This winter threatens not with a gas shortage, but with a potential man-made disaster that could be caused by the loss of heating networks, whose resilience determines whether Kyiv residents will have warmth in their homes. Even having gas reserves won't help if the heat and power plants or boiler houses are damaged by shelling. In such conditions, the authorities must immediately drain the water from the radiators to prevent the pipes from bursting, and shut down backup or mobile boiler houses. A lack of prompt response means that restoring heat will become impossible even after a week. This scenario can be called a man-made disaster, as the consequences will be immediate and large-scale. Residential buildings, hospitals, schools, and industrial facilities will be left without heat, and repair work could take months. This is not science fiction. This is a real threat that energy workers and city authorities are preparing for, testing their emergency response plans. Preparation and a plan B. To avoid disaster, the authorities and energy specialists are developing a detailed plan B. It includes connecting backup boiler houses, gas piston, and cogeneration units, as well as the ability to quickly switch systems to alternative heat supply schemes. In every district and at the level of individual buildings, there must be designated points for the rapid connection of mobile boiler houses to ensure uninterrupted heat supply to residential buildings, schools, and hospitals, as well as modernization of CHP plants and heating networks. This allows for increased production capacity, reduced fuel consumption, and greater system flexibility, especially during the off-heating season. Backup installations and mobile boiler houses can provide stable heating even in the event of partial destruction of the main stations. Energy specialists emphasize that preparation now is not just a precaution, but a real necessity. After all, the lives of thousands of people depend on how quickly actions are taken. Plan B also includes coordination of actions between energy specialists, city authorities, and emergency services. In every district, rapid response algorithms must be developed, backup installation connection points identified, and evacuation procedures established in case heat supply cannot be restored. This helps to avoid large-scale damage to heating networks and ensures stable temperatures in homes, hospitals, and schools, even on the most difficult days. However, even the best plan will only work if there is swift coordination and clear action. And it is precisely this that will determine whether Kyiv can survive the cold without evacuation or whether part of the city will have to be abandoned to save people from the cold and danger. In recent years of the war, Ukrainian cities have already experienced what it means when the heating supply is under threat. In February 2025, Mykolaiv was hit by Shahed drones, resulting in the complete destruction of the power generation at one of the local thermal power plants. As a result, tens of thousands of subscribers were left without heat. The city's mayor, Oleksandr Sienkiewicz, reported that utility services and thermal power plant workers, together with Mykolaiv Oblteplenergo, did everything possible to restore heat supply using alternative solutions. Thanks to cooperation with Denmark, the city received modular boiler houses, which made it possible to maintain heat in hospitals and critically important facilities, even when the main equipment in the city was destroyed. Problems also arose in other districts, particularly where the strike hit directly on the sewage collector, and repair work lasted the entire day. At that time, about 46,000 residents were left without heat. And later, the president noted that more than 100,000 people were affected by the Shahed drone attacks, which demonstrates the aggressors' unwillingness to restore peace. Not only Mykolaiv suffered in April 2024, Kharkiv also felt the consequences of the attacks. In the morning, as a result of the shelling, the CHP plant that supplies the city was damaged, and the transformer substation was completely destroyed. The city's mayor is Ihor Krivyi. Terekov reported that despite the destruction, the city continues to function. The metro, trolleybuses, and part of the tram routes have been launched. However, without a modern air defense system, the restored facilities are constantly under threat of new attacks. Other regions and the president's office actively help the city, providing generators and fuel to stabilize the situation. At that time, more than 200,000 subscribers were left without electricity. Thank you. And the city barely managed to maintain a balance between restoring services and the constant threat of shelling. A similar situation occurred in the Kyiv region. On the night of April 11, 2024, the Tripilska thermal power plant in the city of Ukrainka suffered a direct hit, as a result of which its generation was completely halted. It was the largest thermal power plant in the region, supplying electricity to Kyiv as well as the Cherkasy and Zhytomyr regions. The plant's workers were suspended due to the accident, and restoration required significant resources and time. The facility covers more than 280 hectares, and without it, a large part of the region was left at risk. Thus, the incidents that occurred in Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, and at the Tripilya thermal power plant demonstrate the real consequences of strikes on thermal facilities. There is an immediate risk of mass outages of heat and electricity, which are critically lost. Hospitals, schools, and residential buildings suffer. And to restore services, it is necessary to deploy mobile boiler houses, backup generators, and international aid. These cases clearly show that even with sufficient reserves of gas or electricity, restoring heat supply after an attack can take days or weeks and put people's lives at risk. This winter will be a test not so much for gas reserves as for the resilience of Ukraine's heating infrastructure. Thank you. Kyiv and the major cities have resource reserves. There are modernized CHP plants, backup boiler houses, but the main risk is shelling and the destruction of networks. If large combined heat and power plants or boiler houses go out of service during severe frosts, radiators will burst, pipes will freeze, and restoring heat will become impossible. In such a case, even the capital would have to be partially evacuated. And whether Kyiv residents will be able to survive the cold in their homes depends on how quickly backup systems, mobile boiler houses, and local authorities respond. This apocalyptic scenario is not a fantasy, but a real threat that energy workers are preparing for. Every district, every building must have a plan B, because even a few days of frost without heat could turn the city into a wasteland. The fate of Kyiv this winter depends on how resilient the infrastructure proves to be and how quickly Ukrainians and the authorities respond to an emergency situation. Whether the city will manage to survive the cold without evacuation or whether it will become a ghost town will be revealed in the coming month. This winter will test not only the heating system, but also people's readiness for the most extreme conditions. So we're not trying to scare you. We're urging you to be resilient, to prepare, not to lose faith, and to help not only our armed forces of Ukraine, but also the energy workers. Be sure to subscribe, leave a like, write a comment, and share your life hacks on how you're preparing for this winter. And we will definitely keep you updated on what's happening in our country and beyond, so you can understand the real situation. So we'll see you in the next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Please take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye-bye, everyone.